I take this great opportunity to welcome our esteemed chief guest and keynote speaker, Madam Dr. S. Mahalakshmi, Assistant Professor, Department of Commerce, Central University of Tamil Nadu, Tiruvarur. I welcome our Madam Principal, Dr. R. Geeta, Honorable Vice Principal, Madam Dr. M.S. Lekha from Aided Stream, Honorable Vice Principal, Dr. S. Sita Lakshmi from Self-Finance Stream, Respectable Madam Dr. R. Savitri, Head of the Department, Research Department of Commerce, our beloved Head in Charge, Dr. S. Kamakshi Ma'am, and our beloved faculty members and dear fellow mates. I feel immense pleasure in welcoming you all to this webinar. Now, I call upon Sangeeta V to introduce our chief guest.
Thank you, Akshaya. Thank you, Akshaya. As we all know, success is reached by taking each and every step of ladder. I'm glad to present the success journey of Dr. S. Mahalakshmi Madam, Assistant Professor, School of Commerce and Business Management, Central University of Tamil Nadu. Let me start with her academic background. She was qualified with Bachelor of Bank Management at Meenakshi College for Women, Chennai. Masters of Commerce in Trade and Development at University of Madras. MPhil in Commerce at University of Madras. She is a Pride JRF awarded by UGC. She was awarded Doctorate in Philosophy in Finance by University of Madras. The only source of knowledge is experience. Let me share her experience. She started her career as Teaching cum Research Fellow in Department of Commerce at University of Madras from 2006 to 2007. She enhanced her career since 2013 as Assistant Professor in various universities. Geetham Institute of Management at Geetham University, Faculty of Science and Humanities at SRM University, Department of Humanities and Social Science at NIT Shilhar. At present, she is serving as Assistant Professor in Department of Commerce at Central University of Tamil Nadu since 2017. An investment in knowledge always pays the interest. She is highly interested to share her expertise in the field of derivatives, international finance, corporate finance, investment management, advanced accounting, managerial economics, international economics, quantitative techniques, financial econometrics, and research and methodology. I'm glad to highlight that ma'am has published a research article in about 15 journals in the field of international finance, derivatives, corporate finance, financial economics. Here are some journals which will inspire everyone. Foreign Direct Investment and Regional Economic Development, published in International Journal of Business Excellence. Analysis of performance of disinvested public sector enterprise using DAA approach, published in Indian Journal of Finance. Sky is the limit. She presented a paper at international level in San Diego, CA, USA, organized by Financial Management Association, titled Return and Volatility Spillover Effect Between Rupee-Dollar Exchange Rate and the Asian Stock Indexes. This paper was presented in absentia in the FMA 2018 annual meeting, the prestigious Global Finance Conference. Her life membership with Indian Commerce Association, Indian Econometric Society, Indian Accounting Association added crown to her career. We are eagerly waiting to gain few drops from your expertise. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Sangeeta. Now, I request chief guest.
A very good morning to one and all present here. Happy morning, ma'am. So I'm very glad to have Dr. S. Mahalakshmi in this webinar. It gives me immense pleasure in welcoming ma'am for this webinar. I'm grateful to the management, our principal, aided Vice Principal and Self-Finance Vice Principal for allowing us to conduct this webinar on this wonderful topic. Hope this webinar would be helpful for the students for their research work. I would like to thank Mahalakshmi ma'am for accepting this invitation from us and conducting this webinar. Thank you very much, ma'am. Hope for the best for the students. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Before getting into the session, I request all the participants to clarify your queries through only chat box at the end of the session. Now I request our guest ma'am to take over the session.
Okay, thank you very much. And at the outset, I just thank the principal of SDNB Vaishnav College for giving me this opportunity, and also Kamakshi madam, because I know her for a quite long time, and we had a lot of interaction. And finally, madam just asked me to have a session, and it was very brief introduction. So nothing of that sort. You actually put me on skill, so I have to really do my best. I'll try to do my best. And I thank Kamakshi madam and the Department of Commerce, and my heartfelt thanks to Dr. Professor Savitri madam, because she is my senior research scholar from University of Madras. Really, we happen to learn a lot from Savitri madam and other senior research scholars as well. And I actually thank madam, my personal special thanks to Savitri madam as well. Okay. I think thank you one and all, and thanks for introducing me as well. So it's a very brief introduction. Thank you so much. And yeah, we'll start with the session. So today we are just going to start discussing about the secondary data analysis, some issues and challenges. I hope that most of you'll be doing research. I think most of the students are PG students and research scholars madam was telling about. I think if it is an interactive session, I think I have no issues. I think one by one, you can, if you have any queries, you can ask in between also. Otherwise, you can actually type in the chat box also. It's not a problem. In between, if you have any doubts or queries, you can stop me at any time. So data analysis, generally we do have certain sessions in data analysis. Of course, most of the research universities and then many of the colleges also, they do conduct data analysis part, especially what happens with the secondary data analysis. And there are a lot of issues and challenges when you deal with the secondary data analysis. Madam, could you share the PPT? Kamakshi madam?
Yes, ma'am. Just a minute, ma'am.
Yes. And how many of you know how to do analysis using secondary data? Few. I think if few students you can interact. Otherwise, it will be a monologue, I think. Only 59 participants are there. 1 or 2 students you can interact. Do you have any applicants with secondary data analysis or primary data analysis? And what are the subjects you just had in your UG or post-graduation? I think till they share this PPT, I think we can have some kind of interaction. Yes. Yes, madam, thank you so much. So a few research scholars have joined, and madam, could you move on to the next slide? Yeah, first of all, let us discuss about what is secondary data. You all know about secondary data. I just do not want to explain each and everything. So when you actually started using already gathered data by some researchers or by some organizations, and if you actually want to use those data, then obviously we do consider that as secondary data. And in most of the cases, researchers, they do use primary data as well as secondary data. But the challenge in collecting primary data, both are equally difficult when you actually do analysis. But the challenge in using the secondary data, though it is readily available, but at the same time, you're just going to use the data which are actually being collected by somebody else. It may be by some government organizations. maybe by the previous researchers, and it can be a census data, any kind of already published data. When you use it, actually you need to be little cautious while using that particular data. And let us see what are the aspects that you are going to consider while actually dealing with this kind of secondary data. And of course, you have many other types of secondary data also. Census, the government is actually collecting data through census. You can use census data, and lot of government departments, many government departments, they do collect a lot of information, and we can get those kind of information. And internally, suppose if you want to do a study about say for example about the students of your college, probably your college management, they would have collected some information about the age of the students, about the background of the students, and about the previous marks which has been secured by the students and the current marks which you're securing. And suppose if you want to do any kind of analysis with respect to, say for example, what is the causal relationship between your undergraduation marks and your post-graduation marks. In that case, whatever information already which has been collected by your institute, if you're going to use that institute for further analysis, then of course you will get some interesting results, whether there is any influence of your undergraduation marks on your post-graduation marks, or there may be many other variables also. So any kind of secondary data, it is not necessary that it has to be actually collected by a proper government department or by other institutions or research institutions. Not necessarily. Maybe your previous research scholar would have, the senior research scholar would have collected some information last year. If you use the same information for your analysis, then of course you can use this kind of secondary data as well. And apart from that, if you discuss with the different types of secondary data, generally secondary data, we can classify it as internal data sources as well as external data sources. Sometimes you do collect, in case of a business organization, suppose if you do some kind of research with respect to business organization or with respect to your institution, internally if you collect information, especially from your own institution or your own organization, your own business entity, so those kind of informations are considered as internal data sources. And sometimes you need to get information from outside the institution, outside the organization. So you can actually depend on internal data sources as well as external data sources, especially for your secondary data information. And apart from that, it can be a qualitative data or it can be a quantitative data as well. See, if you can able to express anything in terms of numbers, if you could get the numbers, then obviously you can classify that as quantitative. Apart from that, certain researchers, they might be observing certain information. From reports, you do get certain qualitative information, and those qualitative information can also be used for your own research. From books or from published information, you can do content analysis also sometimes. Say for example, in newspapers, how many times information or some news regarding this COVID vaccination campaign has actually been published in the newspaper, and what was the actual content of that newspaper. So those kind of contents also you can actually collect, and then you can use that for your own research purpose. Madam, you can move to the next slide. Next slide, next. Yeah. So in case of internal information, so what are the kinds, suppose if it is a business organization, what are the kind of internal information which you can use as a secondary source? The first one is the sales data. Suppose if you want to project the future sales of a particular organization, so in that case, so you can actually collect the past information of that particular organization, and based on the past information, it is not necessary that you need to have any other variable also. So only based on the past sales, you can actually use time as the independent variable, and you can project your future sales. Similarly, you can use the data which has been provided by your finance department and marketing department, and many other, almost all the functional departments can provide secondary data. And if you actually consider those kind of secondary data for do some kind of future analysis, then those are all your internal information. And similarly, you can actually have control over this internal information. Suppose if there is any issue in case of your operations management, that can be very well actually be corrected, and accordingly you can make your
plan for future sale, for increasing your future sales, or in order to attract a particular domain of customers, etc. But external information, you do not have any control over that. But sometimes those kind of external information also will have an effect on your company's sales or effect on your company's profit. Say, for example, say this COVID situation, we have not expected. So this is considered as a black swan event. So earlier we don't have such kind of experiences. So in this particular case, almost all the business entities, they have been seriously affected, and the sales of all the companies are being affected. And apart from that, any government announcement, any external information may also have an impact on your company's sales, on your company's working environment, on your employees, employees satisfaction level. It's not only internal, it depends upon certain external factors also. So when you started collecting information from some external sources, then you need to be very, very cautious, especially while handling that kind of secondary data. And please move to the next slide. Yes. So what are the other sources? See, first of all, I'll just tell you few sources from where you can collect your secondary data, and what kind of secondary data you can collect. Especially economic information you can collect. Otherwise, you can collect information which is related to your company, or which is related to your industry, or suppose if you are doing a research on education, it can be your institute information, can be related to your institution, or you can actually collect the general perspective about the particular domain which you are teaching as well. So from lot many organizations you can actually collect secondary sources. So the major secondary source, especially for this macroeconomic information, generally we do collect most of the macroeconomic information and the industry information and other business entities information, especially through the secondary sources. And some of the important external sources of secondary information is this RBI bulletin. And if you actually go through this RBI website, you can collect almost all the macroeconomic variable, and you can actually collect time. It's not only time series, you can collect some cross-sectional data as well as some panel data. So I'll just explain you some of the types of data. It can be, you can apply that for primary data as well as secondary data. When you actually collect data for a particular variable over a period of time, then you do consider that as a time series data. And when you collect data for a particular variable for a particular time period, but if you collect from across different sectors or from different individuals or from different industries, then you do consider that as a cross-sectional data. But at the same time, suppose if you collect data about different industries for a particular variable over a period of 10 years or 20 years, it's a combination of cross-section as well as time series data, though then you do consider that particular data as panel data. So you have a separate domain which is called as panel data statistics or panel data econometrics, which those kind of techniques can be applicable while dealing with these kind of secondary data. So when you have combination of both cross-section as well as time series data, you can really apply any other panel data econometric models or any other mathematical models as well. So here all these kinds of data can be collected, especially from your RBI bulletin, and RBI also publishes statistics and handbook of statistics on Indian economy, and almost all the information related to your banks, NPAs, everything, whatever information you need, you can collect from Reserve Bank of India. Similarly, Ministry of Statistics also provides a lot of other information, and Planning Commission report, economics. So these are some of the list. I just don't want to read all this information. Just want to inform you that these are some of the secondary sources which are actually available for you. Suppose if you want to do a research on foreign investment, how much of investment which we are receiving into our country and how much is the outflow, then obviously you can collect those information, especially from GIBP. Okay, GIBP information you can collect. And similarly, if you want to know some information about some of the inputs about agriculture yield and what happens, so how much is the area of drought, and what are the prospects, especially with respect to the future yield of a particular crop, or whatever you want to do. So you can get information from agriculture statistics of India, and even bulletin of agriculture prices is there, and even I see Indian agricultural institutes, many universities also, they do conduct a lot of researches, so you can actually get information from those bulletins and from those reports and previous research works. From previous research work you can actually get lot of data, and apart from that, you have other secondary sources as well. So almost all the government departments, if you visit all the ministry websites, most of the ministry websites will have a database, and they will actually provide a lot of statistics and whichever information which fits to your domain of research, which fits to your objectives. So those kind of information you need to collect. And apart from that, you have other secondary sources as well. And many sources are paid sources. Sometimes institutions, they do purchase these kind of secondary sources. One important source is CMI, Center for Monitoring Indian Economy Private Limited. They do provide a lot of information about company. Provis is one important and famous database which has been provided by CMI. Almost all the companies' information about the from the board size till the financial information. So you will get across almost all the information, especially from Provis. And not only that, they do have information, separate databases, especially for analyzing the state macros, industry macros, and about the market. If you want any information, you can get market information also from some of the CMI databases. And apart from that, you have Moody's Analytics, and Capline also provides almost all the information about companies and company information about stock prices, etc. And in case if you want to get any historical information regarding stock market, so you can get almost all the information either from NSE website, BSE website, or if you want to deal with commodity derivatives. Suppose if you want to know about what is the influence of this commodity derivatives on your spot price. So in that particular case, you have to actually get the historical data. If you want daily prices, you will get daily prices. If you want minute by minute data, whatever stock or whatever commodity has been traded in the market, if you want minute by minute data, even that kind of information, the high frequency data can also be downloaded, especially from most of the stock exchange platforms. So NSE also provides historical information, similarly NCDX. And suppose if you want information about Chicago Mercantile Exchange, almost all the stock exchanges across the world provides historical information. You can make a comparative analysis also. So whether US stock market has any influence on Indian stock market or not. Even during 2008 crisis, or even after that also, there was a lot of influence, there was a lot of spillover effect between different stock markets. It is not that whatever is happening in India is affecting your stock market. At the same time, whatever happens in the world, any small information or any announcement by the US government or by the Chinese government or any other government may affect your Indian stock prices. Suppose if you want to know the spillover effect of the US stock indices on Indian stock markets, then you can obviously collect data from NYSE or CMI or even Tokyo Exchange, or even you can collect from any other exchanges of the world. Historical information available. Sometimes they do give historical information in their website itself. Sometimes what you have to do is you have to write to them, especially if you are specifically doing some kind of research. If you need some high frequency data, you have to specifically write to the research team of NSE or BSE, and you have to get data, but they do provide those kind of data as well. Madam, next slide, please. Next. Yes. Apart from that, some of the international data. Suppose if you want to actually collect the trade data of export or import data, or if you want to collect foreign investment data about country-wise GDP across all the countries. Suppose if you want to compare the OECD countries, or if you want to compare the performance of BRIC nations, or if you want to know what is the trade relationship between India with that of Asian economies, or with that of NAFTA or SAFTA, then you can collect those information, especially either from IMF, World Bank, or even UNCTAD statistics, United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. They do provide separate statistics, and you can collect almost all the macroeconomic information about all the countries across the world from untagged database, all the trade data, export, import, your FDI inflow, outflow, and the countries, GDP, and even GDP also, many other types of GDP also we do calculate. Most of the economic students, of course, GDP can be calculated. That we will discuss while discussing about the issues with respect to secondary data. And UNDP data center, you can collect almost all the data. And if you want to collect, especially with data, information with respect to environment, I think some of the students, they are just working on sustainable finance and sustainable development practices and on climate change as well. So these are some of the emerging areas, and now almost all the institutions, they started working on something on sustainability area. And even we do, our students also, they do work on sustainability area. And you need to collect information regarding the ESG index. Okay, so now governance, corporate governance, the entire term has also been changed. Now we no more talk about this corporate governance alone. It is ESG, it is environment, social, and governance part. Okay, so in this case, actually, a lot of index has been developed. This ESG index has been developed by many organizations, and even Thomson Reuters has its own index, and Bloomberg has developed its own index. Suppose if you want to collect those kind of indexes in order to check to what extent, say for example, your ESG index has an influence on your earnings management. So those kind of research also you can do. Apart from that, to what extent the climate bonds has an effect in mitigating the emissions in your country, or in OECD countries, or in most of the European countries or European Union. Whatever information you want, you can actually collect those information, especially from UNEP, and not only from UNEP, you do collect a lot of this kind of information from World Bank and IMF database as well. They do provide almost all the information regarding to sustainable development practices. And apart from that, if you want labor information, labor statistics, average labor wages across nations, that can be collected from ILO, and FAO statistics will give you information regarding the prices of almost all the food commodities. Not only with respect to US, you can actually collect information for other related economies as well. And apart from that, this Thomson Reuters database provide almost all the information about the private companies and public limited companies worldwide. And Bloomberg is one famous database. I think most of the institutions in India also, they do have this Bloomberg database. Earlier, I think the Pondicherry University, they had, and most of the IIMs and IITs, many IITs also, they do purchase this Bloomberg. They will get access for this Bloomberg database, but it's all paid. Most of the database, other than IMF, World Bank, this Thomson Reuters, Bloomberg, and CompuStat, these are all paid databases. Generally, you need to pay and you have to purchase. Otherwise, what you can do is, so you can actually write to some of the institutions which has actually subscribed. So if you have Bloomberg, you need not worry for anything. So if you want to know about ESG index, or if you want to know about the amount which has been spent by the government, especially for sustainable practices, or if you want to know about the board size of a set of companies in a particular industry, so any information across, or if you want to know about the stock prices or commodity prices over a period of 10 years, if you want daily data, even then you can collect almost all the information from Bloomberg. It's such a versatile database, especially Bloomberg and Thomson Reuters. Comparatively, Bloomberg is much better, and most of the IIMs, they do have, I think, sometimes they do give permission even to university students as well as college students. With proper permission, I think you can able to access these kind of databases from those institutes. Apart from that, CompuStat is there, and it has been developed by Standards and Poor's, and even similarly, it will also provide almost all the information about the companies' financial statements, and the board size, and the market price, market capitalization, every other information you can actually get from these databases. These are some of the databases. Very few I have actually mentioned here due to time constraint. Apart from that, you have n number of databases. Even EPW also, Economic and Political Weekly also, they do have their database. And not only that, even IndiaStat, they do have its own database. All the macroeconomic India's macroeconomic data you will actually get from IndiaStat and many other websites also. And it's better to get it from the government website because it generally is free. Suppose if you can access Bloomberg, it's very well, you can get very good authenticated information. Otherwise, it is not an issue. Any published information by any government source, it's actually reliable. Madam, next slide, please. And if you look at, of course, you know the benefits. One is convenience, ease of collecting the data, secondary data benefits when you see. And in case of primary data, you have to take a lot of pain, especially if you want to collect some information from 300, minimum 300 respondents. Generally, you have to actually, suppose if you do research, even for a PG project, you need to collect data. Your teachers will be asking you to collect data at least from 100 respondents, and you have to go and you have to meet them and you have to explain each and every statement or each and every aspect, and you have to capture them. Sometimes they do respond, sometimes they do not respond. Sometimes they will give information for half of your statements, and the remaining statements will be very sensitive. They may not give you information. So these are some of the difficulties with respect to primary data, and the amount of time you have to spend. So in order to collect data from at least 300 respondents, a minimum, suppose if you go for a survey, a sample survey with respect to any, any consumer perception about a particular product or their purchase behavior, or if you want to know about the attitude or the level of stress of employees who are working in an organization. So any information you can capture, but certain information will be very sensitive. You're not to collect information at least from 350 or 400 respondents. You need to wait for at least 6 months. You have to spend, without spending 6 months of time, it is very difficult for you to collect information. And nowadays, actually, we are using Google Forms and we are collecting information. Even if we use Google Form and collect primary data, you have to actually wait for at least 3 to 4 months. And sometimes if you use Google Forms, what happens is that they don't give the reliable, you do not know whether that information is actually the reliable information, whether they have given the true information or not. So when you have an interpersonal communications, you know whether they are actually giving the correct information or not. Sometimes if you do not have an interpersonal relationship, sometimes they may not give the correct information. So it is not possible for them to give the correct information also. So because you are not able to convince them over phone, or you cannot able to convince them by sending an email. So in most of, suppose a certain sensitive information, now we have all seen the plight of migrant laborers during COVID. Suppose if you are going to do some research on this migrant laborers, and there is a term called environmental migrants, especially most of the economic students, they may be knowing it. If you want to know about the savings pattern or the financial literacy of the migrant laborers, or if you want to know about the socio-economic status of this kind of migrant laborers, and how do you collect information through Google Form, it is not possible. So you have to go directly, sit with them, you have to talk, and sometimes you need to observe as well through their body language, and by observing their work pattern, and by observing the nature of work which they are doing, and by observing their dwellings, actually you can actually capture a lot of information. So primary data information really, you can do a lot of wonder, even without asking questions. Through observation you can collect a lot of information, but sometimes it is not possible always to collect primary information. Suppose if you want to know about the total number of population who are living below poverty line, or the total number of middle income groups in a particular state or in a particular district, or if you want such kind of block-wise information, it is not possible for you to go and meet each and every single household. It will be very difficult. So in that particular case, what you can do is you can use the census information which has been actually collected by the government, okay, for convenience sake. So it's convenient. Sometimes you at one go, within a day, you can collect whatever information you want. Almost all the data can be collected within a day also. So it is very convenient, and not only that, it's low cost. Just a moment. So excuse me. So, and it's less costly. Okay, sitting at your home and using your internet connection. If you want to collect information from UNDP, or if you want to collect information for data from UNTAD, So within a click, you can able to collect information and you can save a lot of time because this data collection period itself, in case of primary data, it will take at least minimum 6 months to 1 year for some researchers. In case it depends upon the length of your questionnaire as well. Sometimes some researchers, they do have 100 plus statements, but sometimes it is required actually in order to capture the different dimensions of a particular aspect. But in case of secondary data, it's very within very less time you can able to actually get all the data, and availability of varied information is possible, and you can do a longitudinal analysis also. So you can look at the different dimensions of a particular problem using a variety of information which you could get at one click, and it could also provide some new insights. Sometimes you do actually collect information from the previous research records and reports, and it will give you a lot of new insights, so that from that you can actually develop a new research dimension altogether. Okay, please move on to the next slide. Yes, and what are the issues and challenges? Is it by looking at these benefits, we can actually say that it is very easy. So why to struggle a lot to collect primary data? And it's better I can sit at my home and I can actually finish my research. So that would be the mindset of many of the students, because generally the mindset of the students is easily we have to everything we need to get easily at very less time, but it is not so. So nothing is available at free of cost, and nothing is available for you easily. So even in case of secondary data, what are the issues and challenges which generally we encounter? My entire PhD study and research is all about secondary data, complete secondary data research, but really it took more than a year for me to collect the information which I actually required. So it was not that easy. So first one is data availability. Sometimes data may not be available, so we need to actually need certain variables, especially for our study. So many variables we need, but we may not get the data. And not only that, sometimes we need data for 30 years. Data may not be available for 30 years. Data may be available. Suppose if you want to collect data from liberalization from 1991 for a particular variable, data may not be available. I'll just give you one example. Say suppose if you want to do some research on balance of payment, capital current accounts. So current account deficit is a very sensitive issue. I think many of you will be studying foreign trade and foreign exchange. So this current account deficit is a very, very sensitive issue. And in your balance of payment, you have two accounts, major two accounts, and now you have many classifications as well in the revised format. So current account and capital account. Okay. So in the current account, you have many components. You have components are for exports, imports, and invisibles. Many other components are there, and almost all the inflow and outflow will be captured there in the current account. And the long-term inflow and outflow with investment and loans, everything will be captured under your capital account. So in this particular case, I'll just give you one example. Suppose if you want to know about the investment income inflow or investment income outflow, which means that the investment will be appearing in the capital account, but whatever income which you are paying, if you receive foreign investments, generally we do record it in our capital account, and that is an inflow, and it will actually increase your money value. Basically there is an inflow, right? So it will actually have an impact on the currency appreciation. But over a period of time, so whatever money we have received, that money will be multiplied, and sometimes it will be reinvested in our country, and sometimes it will be sent outside. Especially it is called as income repatriation. So the companies, they do repatriate their income. It is called as income outflows. Suppose if we want to collect that particular information, if I want to see the trend, especially of this income outflows, okay, repatriated income outflows of the foreign investment which I have received in my country. So in that case, if I want data from 1991, I may not get data. It is very difficult to get that kind of data. So you have to write to RBI, and if you take RBI bulletins and everything, if you want that specific information, because earlier they do club everything and they will give it as invisibles. Okay, so income inflow and outflow. Especially if I specifically want this foreign direct investment repatriated income outflow, that particular component may not be available for the period which I want. Okay, so sometimes it may not be available. Suppose if it is available from 2000, then I have to actually start studying from 2000 because of the non-availability of data for a particular period. And sometimes for certain variables, data may not be there. Suppose if you want to do a research on money laundering, then do you think that you do get almost all the information about money laundering? Definitely, sometimes these kind of sensitive data we may not get. Availability itself is a big challenge, and apart from that, the quality of the data. So, what is the issue with this quality? Because this data, you don't collect this data, and you don't have the control over the quality of the data. And we do not know what are the parameters which they have used for collecting the data. Say, for example, I told you about this ESG index, right? ESG index has been calculated. But Bloomberg is also calculating separately, and even Thomson Reuters also they calculate separately, and many other organizations also they do calculate. But still, the parameters which they are using differs. And if Thomson Reuters use only 4 parameters and Bloomberg may use 8 parameters, and which one is better? I have to, as a researcher, I need to decide. Sometimes you know what are the parameters they have used for calculating a particular variable. Sometimes you do not know what are the exact parameters which they have used. So you cannot have control over the quality of the data, and you do not have the control over the data set itself at some times. And sometimes specific information may not be available. Sometimes you do get irrelevant data which you do get, but it may not be relevant for you. And not only that, sometimes what happens is that suppose if you want to collect data with respect to a particular region, that particular data may not be available. Okay, and for few years and for a specific kind of population, you cannot get data. So these are some of the challenges. Apart from that, sometimes you get exaggerated data. Okay, say for example, whatever information you want to look at, you will not get only that information. So you do get a lot many other information beyond that, and from that you have to actually carefully collect your own information. Sometimes there may be data redundancy. So multiple times the same kind of data may be appearing in certain databases, and you have to actually clean and you have to consider the data which you need. And apart from that, for a single variable, you do have multiple values. I think Madam said few economic students have also joined, and the GDP, some of you, I think one of you can tell GDP means which GDP. Suppose if you want to know the influence of GDP on per capita income, impact of GDP on per capita income, which GDP you do use, and how many GDPs are available in RBI database. Have you ever come across this? Yes. See, if you go to your RBI website, you do get GDP values over a period of even quarterly data you do get, but you have to decide whether you have to consider the real GDP or the nominal GDP. And apart from that, GDP has been calculated at factor cost, and GDP will be calculated on market prices. So 4 types or 4 values you do get in RBI website, and you have to decide which one you have to. Generally, we don't consider nominal GDP because it is not inflation adjusted. Generally, we do consider whatever variables, even if it is exports or imports or whatever it is, we do consider the real exports or real imports or real GDP, because that is actually inflation adjusted. Only then you can compare. So like that, you have to actually suppose these values, these variables will be provided by different. So from economic survey, you can take GDP, from RBI side, you can take GDP, and from other websites also you can, even all these private databases also, they do provide GDP value. Do you think that the value will be exactly the same? Do you think the value will be exactly the same? Definitely, sometimes it may not be exactly same. So there will be a slight variation, and most of the times we do get confused which one to pick. So actually, in that case, you have to actually go for some of the authenticated government websites in order to collect information. And sometimes few will be calculated for calendar year, and few variables will be calculated for financial year. And during COVID period, of course, most of the financial years also have been extended. So at times you will get multiple values, and sometimes you will get estimates as well. So you have to be very careful in getting those kind of information, and multiple sources. Sometimes you do get the same variable data for the same variable from multiple sources, and you have to be very cautious in choosing a particular authenticated source. So these are all some of the challenges, and sometimes what happens is that, see, whenever if you collect indexes, especially index of industrial production or real effective exchange rate index, real effective exchange rate, or whatever, these kind of information you do get. But what happens is that, suppose if you collect information from 1960 to 2020-21 in order to see the effect of exports and imports on real effective exchange rate, or there is a causal relationship as well. Sometimes you can see the exchange, what is the influence of exchange rate on your exports and imports. So in that particular case, if you collect data for a period of 40 years or more than 40 years, what happens is that these index, the base year which they are using for calculating these indexes changes sometimes. So up to a particular period, say for example from 1950 to 1980 or 81, they will be considering one particular, maybe 50 can be considered as a base year. So after that, what happens is that they do change the base year as 1980. So from 1980, you do get data, but when you need a consistent data, what you have to do is you have to actually convert. I think in most of the students you would have studied the change of base year in statistics. That is possible, you can change it, but as such you cannot collect that you cannot have a continuous data. So what you need to do is you have to collect both the information which actually been calculated using 1950 as the base year, and the remaining information will be calculated using 1980 as the base year, and you have to actually convert it into a single base year from 1950 to 2020. So that those kind of cleaning you need to do when you actually deal with this kind of secondary data. Please move on to the next slide. And yeah, so what kind of analysis? So these are all some of the challenges in collecting the secondary data itself. Okay, so whatever I just told you are some of the challenges in collecting the secondary data. But after that, after collecting the secondary data, you have to clean it properly. So I just told you about the base year, and not only that, sometimes what happens, the definition of certain variables may also change. I can give you one simple example. This foreign direct investment. So I'm just giving example from my own research. Sorry for that. And not only that, some of the classification of industry. So now how many classification you do have, how many industries you do have? You have many industries. Earlier you don't have those many industries. Earlier you have very few industries. In 1960s and 1970s, you have very few industries. Okay, so almost all the electrical, electronic industry and everything clubbed together, you do get, suppose if you want to know about the total sales of a particular industry, you do get. But after some point of time, the government has actually divided those industries. You have many classifications. Earlier, from 20 or 30 industries, now you have n number of industries, more than 100 industries you can classify now. So actually, electrical, electronics, and everything combined together. Now it's a different industry. Okay, and now you have a new industry which is software. Suppose if you want to know about the information from 1960s or 1950s to 2020, obviously what you need to do is you need to club certain industries. And similarly, I just told you about this foreign direct investments, right? Suppose if you want to collect information about foreign investments from 1980s to 2020, then which information you will collect? Will you get the equity inflow alone, or will you consider the reinvested earnings, or will you consider the other capital inflows? So that is a challenge, because the definition of FDI itself has been changed during the year 2000. So when you actually collect data from 1980 to 2020, then which one you have to consider? Because you cannot consider the information with respect to the international best practices. Okay, so you cannot consider the FDI based on the new definition, because you are collecting data from 1980. So where the actual calculation has not been included this reinvested earning and the other capital. So you have to collect only the equity information. So that is a limitation of your study. Sometimes you have to highlight those limitations in your study also, which means that from 2000 onwards, if you take only equity inflows in order to account for your FDI, which means that it's just 80%. of the actual FDI which you are considering for your research. Sometimes it may not lead to the expected results. So these are some of the limitations when we deal with this kind of secondary data. And what are the general analysis which, madam, if I have to stop, please let me know. Yes. So sometimes, yes. What kind of analysis we can do? You can do any kind of analysis. So generally, we do consider the relationship between two variables or more than two variables. And apart from that, we do test the differences in the variables between the samples. And sometimes we do actually consider the pattern of relationship between the variables and how the variables change over a period of time. So these are all some of the basic analysis which we do. And suppose if there is one variable, the company's sales or the company's profit after tax. So suppose if you collect 10 companies data from pharmaceutical industry, and if you want to know what happened to the sales of these companies during COVID time, suppose if you collect the daily sales, generally you don't get the daily sales information, but still internal, suppose if they are doing an internal research, they do get daily sales and they do get the daily sales of other pharmaceutical companies also. And if you want to test whether there is any difference in the sales of these 10 pharmaceutical companies during COVID period, then what kind of test we can apply? Of course, you can, if you have more than 2 groups, then you can very well apply ANOVA in order to know the difference in the sales, especially of the pharmaceutical companies during this particular period. Similarly, if you want to know the change in the behavior of the variable, or if you want to know the pattern of relationship between variables, you do not have any other technique other than regression, which is of course you have many other techniques also, but one important technique which actually been applied by most of the researchers is regression, because it will help you in identifying the extent of change in one variable with respect to the change in the related variables, the other variables. And if you have n number of independent variables, even then you can actually apply this particular technique. And similarly, sometimes you do not know which one is a dependent variable and which one is an independent variable. Say for example, export and exchange rate, which is dependent and which is independent, we do not know which is independent and which is independent. How do you define which is independent and which is dependent? Is exchange rate is dependent on exports, or exports is dependent on exchange rate? There is a causal relationship, so it's both the way. Okay, exports will also influence your exchange rate and exchange rate will also influence exports. Sometimes you cannot actually determine a particular variable as a dependent variable or independent variable by actually reading that particular variable or looking at the variable, because if you take literature review related to this, the relationship between exports and exchange rate, n number of literature is available for you, and sometimes they do consider exchange rate as dependent and sometimes they do consider it as independent. So here what you have to do is you can apply regression, so you can run x on y and y on x. So this regression technique is the basics, especially I think for most of the econometric techniques, and most of the people who are using the secondary data analysis, for them the basic regression analysis is very, very important. And I do not have much time to discuss about almost all other things. You can apply ANOVA test, whatever test you can actually apply for analyzing your primary data. Almost all the tests are applicable even in case of secondary data also. So why I'm going to discuss only about this classical linear regression model or the simple multiple regression model, the basic regression model, is that so in most of the researchers, we do actually the objective would be to find the change in the behavior of certain variables, or to know the pattern of relationship, or to find out the determinant. Please move to the next slide. Yes. So you can use any statistical model or econometric model or any mathematical or even optimization models also you can use, but you have to use appropriate technique, and it depends upon the nature of the variables and the objective of your research as well. Next. Yes. So I think most of you know about the levels of measurement. Those who have actually studied statistics, you know very well about the levels of measurement. So there are 4 classifications: nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio. Suppose even in case of secondary data, you do get nominal data. Suppose census data. If you're going to use census information, what are the information generally they do ask while taking census? name, gender, age, and then social status, and then their economic, what is that, economic status, and apart from that, what is the economic operation which they are doing, and how many members are there in the family, and number of children, their education, etc., etc. So in this particular case, nominal, which are the nominal variables here? Of course, gender. Say for example, in gender you will be having 3 classifications. Okay, so male, female, and transgender. So in that particular case, suppose if you give a code for gender, and this is not a primary data, this is secondary data which you are going to use. Say for example, if you are going to use census data, then obviously gender, and you have to classify. There will be information about male, female, and transgender. So in this particular case, if you give 1 as a code for male, and if you give 2 for female, and if you give 3 for transgender, in this case, will you consider that as a nominal or ordinal data? Just a nominal data. That 1, 2, and 3 doesn't mean that 1 is greater than 1 is superior, or 1 is greater than 2, or 2 is greater than 1, or 3 is greater than 2 and 1. It's not. It's just a coding which I am giving. So in this case, there is no order. I cannot arrange it in ascending or descending order. Similarly, I cannot find that what is the difference between 1 and 2. Nothing. Okay, it's meaningless if I say that the distance between 1 and 2 is 1, because this is just a classification which I am giving. This 1 and 2 is just a representation of whether it is male or female, or whether it is a transgender. That's it. So it doesn't give any other meaning. You cannot order in ascending or descending order. You cannot rank it. You cannot find the difference between this 2 and origin. There is no 0. 0 means, of course, there is no. It's not an actual absolute number basically. So these kind of variables are considered as nominal variables, and apart from that, if you could arrange, then you can consider those variables orderable. Suppose if I ask the preferences of the consumers about a particular type of brand. Suppose in case of mobile phones, if I give 2 or 3 options, 3 or 4 mobile phones, if I ask the customers to give their preferences, if I ask them to rank the mobile brands based on the preferences, in that particular case, I can actually order. I can arrange them based on the preferences. So 1 most preferred, and then 5 least preferred. So if I actually arrange those numbers, then I can say that, so wherever they have given 1, that is most preferred, and 5 is maybe the least preferred, or it can be otherwise also. But here I cannot find the distance, because the first preference may be, say for example, Oppo, and the second preference maybe Nokia or Samsung. So in that particular case, 1 and 2, the first, I'm just giving a rank. The first rank, my first preference is Oppo, and second preference is Samsung. Say for example, third maybe Nokia, and so on. So in this particular case, I can order it based on my preference, but I cannot find out the distance. The difference between Oppo and Samsung and Nokia may not be the same. Okay, so I cannot find out distance. So in this case, if you can either arrange the variables in ascending or descending order, and if it gives some meaningful information, then I can consider that variable as an ordinal variable. And in case of interval variable, suppose if I can arrange a particular variable in ascending or descending order, and at the same time, if I can find out the distance between those 2 options, but if there is no origin, if there is no 0, then obviously it is considered as an interval variable. Say for example, most of you will be using scale, especially the 5-point scale, Likert scale, or 7-point scale. Actually, it's an ordinal. Sometimes it's an ordinal scale, but sometimes instead of options, say for example, if it is a satisfaction scale, if it's a 5-point scale, you do give some options: highly satisfied, satisfied, somewhat satisfied, dissatisfied, and highly dissatisfied. So in that particular case, what happens is that the distance, to some extent, you have to give the options where the distance between, if the distance between highly satisfied and satisfied and somewhat satisfied, if it is same, then you do consider that as an interval scale. So many researchers, what they do is, instead of giving these options, what they do give is most preferred to least preferred. They do give, and in between they do give ratings. So 1 to 5. 1 to 5. So 1 means most preferred and 5 means least preferred, or 5 means most preferred or 1 means least preferred. It depends upon the researcher's decision. Okay. So here in this case, if the distance between 1 and 2, 2 and 3, 3 and 4, 4 and 5, if it is same, then you do consider that particular scale as an interval scale. Suppose if the distance is not the same, then you cannot consider as an interval scale, it's just an ordinary scale. And apart from that ratio, so all the secondary data, almost not all the secondary data. Suppose if you collect information regarding sales, if you collect information regarding GDP, exports, etc. In this case, you can arrange GDP either in ascending order or in descending order. Suppose if you collect 10 years GDP, so you can arrange it either based on ascending or descending order. And similarly, you can find out the difference between last year's GDP, this year's GDP, and the next year's GDP also. You can exactly find out the difference. And apart from that, it can be zero as well sometimes. Sometimes the sales can be zero, exports can be zero, imports can be zero, and so it has its own origin. So this is considered as a higher level of measurement, and most of the macroeconomic indicators and secondary data which we are using actually fits into this ratio level. So if your variable is at this ratio level, then you can apply any mathematical model or any statistical model. You can apply anything. You can apply anything for your analysis. Madam, next slide, please. Now, so how do you determine the pattern of relationship between these variables? First, suppose now you want to know the direction of pressure. I just told you sometimes the direction of relationship itself will be quite ambiguous. You do not know whether a particular variable X is influencing Y or Y is influencing X. So based on review of literature, generally we do consider a particular variable as X and particular variable as Y. Okay, so it can be dependent or it can be independent. So you want to know the direction of relationship. So sometimes you can apply correlation to find out the relationship, but in correlation, you can know whether it is positively related or negatively related, whether it is related or not, but you do not know, you do not know to what extent is the relationship. You do not know the direction of that particular relationship, whether X is influencing Y or Y is influencing X. You do not know when you apply correlation. Apart from that, suppose if you want to know the determinants of certain variables, say for example, attitude of a person, or even in case of primary, suppose if some of your senior researchers collected attitude of 10 students, and if you are going to use the same information, you do not know whether the attitude of person is determined by the attitude of friend A or friend B or friend C. So in that case, suppose if 3 are influencing, then definitely you have to actually include the 3. Say another example, exports. Okay, exports. So what are the determinants of your exports? So you can consider GDP, you can consider exchange rate, you can consider the industry index of industrial production, etc., and so on. Many other variables are is a situation in the international market and the demand in the international market, and number of variables you can add. So what is a major determinant? So if you want to know that, you can apply multiple regression technique. And in fact, what is the extent of relationship? What extent there will be a change in the Y variable if there is a change in the X variable? See here, I'm using this X and Y. I think I don't know how many students they know very well about X and Y. So X is none other than the independent variable. Y is the dependent variable. In regression analysis, we do use the equation Y is equal to alpha plus bx. I think you see this one. So with Y is equal to alpha plus beta x here. Okay, so in this particular case, this is none other than it is the dependent variable and this is the independent variable. In most of the cases in research, we do consider certain variables as dependent variable and certain variables as independent variables. And what is the extent of the effect? Okay, so to what extent this Y variable, this dependent variable changes with respect to 1 unit change in the dependent variable. I'll just explain you what is this alpha and beta later. And apart from that, I just told you about the causal relationship. So if X is also influencing Y and Y is also influencing X, say for example, if extreme example I'm just giving, exports may influence exchange rate and exchange rate may also influence exports. So in that case, you can find out the causation of causal relationship. And apart from that, sometimes what is the necessity of doing all this analysis? You have to actually take the future decision based on the information which you are getting. So for that, forecasting is very, very important. Unless and until you forecast your sales, you cannot determine your production plan. You cannot actually do your financial plan. So if you know the future sales only, then accordingly you just determine, so what are the operations which you have to carry out in order to meet the future demand of future sales. Okay, there are different steps, especially when you do analysis. First is that you have to actually state the theory of the hypothesis. First, based on the review of literature, you have to frame the hypothesis, whether there is a causal relationship exists between the variables, or whether there is whether X is influencing Y or Y is influencing X. In this particular case, say for example, if you have two variables, if you have exports and GDP, whether GDP has any influence on your exports, or sometimes you can use some other variable, index of industrial production. If index of industrial production is having an influence on your exports. So in this particular case, you have to state your null hypothesis and alternate hypothesis. So generally, hypothesis is nothing but it's just an assumption which you are making based on the past information, or based on the information you have actually collected from your review of literature, and based on that you are framing the null hypothesis and the alternate hypothesis. Null hypothesis to reject. So generally this hypothesis is a very big area. I just don't want to touch everything. So generally philosophers, what they do is they just tend to, suppose if they assume something, they just tend to take the opposite position. By strengthening the opposite position, actually what they do is they will try to justify the opposite position in spite of actually supporting the opposite position. In spite of that, if they are unable to justify, then they do justify whatever they have assumed is actually correct. Which means that, so when you know that there is an influence of index of industrial production on the exports of that particular period, then the alternate hypothesis, you have to take the null hypothesis and you have to try to actually prove it, and in spite of that, if you're unable to prove it, then you can say that the alternate hypothesis holds good. So you can reject the null hypothesis because you do not have enough evidence to accept it. Okay, and yes, so after that, what happens is that you have to actually fix the level of significance. The level of significance is none other than, so how much is the extent of type 1 error which you're going to allow. So type 1 error is none other than, so rejecting the null hypothesis when it is true. Okay, so you have type 2 error as well. So that is accepting the null hypothesis when it is false. But the first one is actually a serious problem. So you have to fix your level of significance. Suppose if the level of significance is 5%, which means that you are just allowing the type 1 error to the extent of 5%. That's it. And after that, you need to specify the model. What is the model that you are going to specify? So you have to specify your model and obtain the data. Then you have to estimate this parameters. Parameters are none other than this alpha and this beta are the parameters which you have to estimate. So that there lies your actual results. And after that, you have to test the null hypothesis. Okay. So how to test the null hypothesis? By applying the statistical test, you can actually test the null hypothesis. Once if your hypothesis, if your alternate hypothesis is true, and if you could reject your null hypothesis, then you can use these parameters alpha and beta for prediction purpose, and it will be useful for determining the future policy or future decisions. Madam, next, please. See, here I'll just give you a small example about the simple regression technique. And I'm just going to deal only with the simple regression technique today. And if time permits, maybe in future, using secondary data, we will try almost all the other statistical techniques also. I'll tell you, while doing analysis also, you do face a lot of issues. Okay, there are a lot of assumptions which has to be satisfied when you actually deal with the secondary data and when you apply these kind of regression techniques, because whenever if you want to know the influence of one variable and other variable, you have no other option, you have to go for regression technique. And similarly, if you want to know the determinants of, if you want to know the causal relationship between two variables, then this is the base. And if you want to know what would be the future demand, or what would be the future rate of exchange, what would be the future price of a particular product or particular commodity, you have no other option. You have to actually rely on these techniques. Of course, you have a lot of hybrid techniques, but the basic technique, if you understand, really you can do a lot of wonders. And you can actually start studying basic econometrics when you know what are the basic regression technique. I think most it, but still, if it is a repetition, I think you can write it in the comment box so that I can skip few things. So it is not necessary that I have to show almost all the equation. I'll skip few things. It will not be more technical, but still I'll just explain you the concept. So here I have given two examples. One is if a company wants to find out whether advertisement is actually influencing sales or not, because a lot of companies, they do spend crores and crores of money on advertisement in order to boost their sales, not increase their sales, and a lot of celebrities have been used, especially for acting in this advertisement, and that's very costly affair. And now, if you see in many advertisements, even the proprietors, actually the promoters, actually they do come in that advertisement, they do act in that advertisement. So in that way, they can save a lot of, especially in case of Lalita Jewelry, and in case of Saravana advertisements, you can see the promoters actually coming in that advertisement, and really they can save a lot of money instead of paying for the celebrities. So, and not only that, advertisement, whether this much of expenditure which you're spending is really having an effect on sales or not. So we can find out the relationship here, which one is a dependent variable and which one is an independent variable. So anyway, here we are just going to assume that sales is a dependent variable and advertisement is the independent variable. So no, advertisement is not dependent on sales, but actually your sales may be dependent on advertisement. So why are you spending basically in order to increase the company's sales? So here I'm just considering X as the independent variable and Y as the dependent variable of this particular company. I just want to know the probable relationship between these two variables. Madam, next slide please. So here you have many other terminologies which you must know. In some of the research papers, instead of dependent variables, they'll be using explained variable or regressant or predictant. Similarly, instead of independent variable, it can be used as explanatory, predictor, or regressant. This is just for your information. Next slide, please. Yeah. So no, previous one. So now, see here in this particular case, I've just plotted sales in the y-axis and advertisement in the x-axis, and then just want to see the relationship. So if I plot the actual data, this is how I just get the graph. Okay, so I can see a upward movement in this particular curve. This is none other than it explains the relationship between advertisement and sales. Suppose if I spend 5,000 units of rupees, it can be 5 lakhs or 5 crores also. So just 5,000 I've given. So 5,000 units, then the sales would be something around 2,000 plus, and so on. So there is if I started increasing the advertisement expenditure, see how the curve is going. It's an upward curve. So I can find out an upward linear relationship between sales and advertisements. Now, in this particular case, can I use only advertisement to determine the forecast my future sales? That I know only by running a regression analysis. Next slide, please. So first, what I need to do is first I have to state the hypothesis. So this is how I have to state the hypothesis. H0 is none other than it's my null hypothesis, and H1 is the alternate hypothesis. If I'm a little fast, please inform me. So here, I know very well that, so by plotting the graph, I can understand that, of course, advertisement may increase sales. So the alternate hypothesis, so what I am assuming is that advertisement has an effect on sales. So what I need to do is now I have to take an opposite stand and form my null hypothesis. Advertisement has no effect on sales. Now I have to test this hypothesis, and how to test this particular hypothesis. Okay, so I can test this hypothesis by using this beta. Okay. So this is my beta. Suppose if beta is equal to 0, then I can say, I can conclude that advertisement has no effect on sales. Suppose if beta is not equal to 0, if it is not equal to 0, then I can say that advertisement has an effect on sales. So I can actually keep on spending more money towards advertisement in order to increase my company's sales. So what is this particular beta? Okay, B1. So this beta is none other than, it is just the marginal effect of advertisement on sale, and most of the students will be calculating this demand elasticity of demand. Okay, this price elasticity and advertisement elasticity, cross elasticity will be calculating. So whatever numbers you will get, it's similar to your beta. Okay, so in this particular case, beta is none other than, it explains the marginal effect of advertisement on sales. Marginal effect of advertisement on your sales, which is X. Advertisement X on your sales Y. So here, next slide, please. Okay, I'm just, yeah. So this I think we have already explained. So I'm just considering a level of significance as 5%. Level of significance is none other than it is the extent of tolerating your type 1 error. Okay, generally it can be 1% or it can be 5% or it can be 10%, or some people they do consider 20% as well. Okay, for in some cases, but rarely it's not so. So 5% in general. Suppose if I want to reduce my type 1 error, obviously I'll be increasing my type 2 error. So I'll just fix it at 5%. Okay, next one. Next, yes, no, previous one, sorry. Yes. So here this is the model. Y is equal to alpha plus beta X. So here I'm just considering Y as sales and X as the advertisement expenditure. Then what is this alpha and beta? So this alpha is none other than it's a constant, and beta is none other than the slope of that particular equation. So these are all the two parameters which I'm just going to calculate. So here in this case, even though there is no change in the advertisement, there will be a no change in the advertisement expenditure, there will be a change in the sales. That will be captured by alpha. But actually my intention is not that. My intention is actually to know whether I have to spend this much of money for advertisement or not. So for that, I want to know, so what is the effect of my advertisement expenses on sales? What marginal effect? So this beta, how do we interpret is that, what is the, it explains the extent of change in my Y variable with respect to 1 unit change in my X variable. Say for example, suppose if this beta is 0.5, the value of beta is 0.5, which means that if there is a 1 unit change, if there is a 1 unit increase in my advertisement expenditure, then sales increases to the extent of 0.5 units. So this is how I do interpret. And next slide. Next slide. Yeah. Now you just see in this particular equation, there is one more term which is E. Okay, so plus E, or we can write it as E. This is the epsilon, which I'm just using in this equation, which is none other than the error term. It is not a mistake. So it is just an unknown factor or an unexplained term. So this model cannot explain certain things. See, will my sales depend only on advertisement expenditure? Definitely not. Lot many other factors may have an influence on sales. The price of the product can have an influence on sales. The price of substitute products, the price of complementary products, and the income of the consumers. N number of variables I can keep on adding. Okay, so, but I'm not adding all those things in this particular model because I'm just going to apply simple regression technique. So in case of simple regression technique, I can have only one X. Suppose if I apply multiple regression technique, I can use the multiple X's, X1, X2, X3. I can add advertisement expenses, I can add price of the product, price of substitutes, price of complements, etc. So here, this is the unexplained term. So this can be consumer demand or consumer income. This can be the package expenses, etc. And anything. Okay. So, but this is not just a mistake or error. This is just an unexplained term which cannot be captured in this particular model. Actually, this E should be minimum. Only then I can say that my model is a perfect model. Only then I can use the parameters for forecasting my future sales. Otherwise, I cannot use it. I have to improve my model. Next. Okay. So this I'm not going to explain. This is just the equation. Method of least squares equation I'm just using in order to calculate the parameters, which is alpha and beta. I think most of you you would have done it in your statistics class. Actually, if you simultaneously, so what you need to do is suppose if you have sales of 5 years, and if you have advertisement expenditure for the past 5 years, then the total sales and the total advertisement expenditure you need to calculate. And next, in the next column, what you need to do is you have to calculate X square and XY. And then finally you will get sigma X, sigma Y, and sigma XY, sigma X squared. Everything if you just apply here, then what you need to do is you have to simultaneously solve this equation. So if you simultaneously solve this equation, then you do get the value of alpha and beta. Okay, I can show it in Excel also. I don't time to do this problem. Otherwise, I can do it. So what you have to do is in the first columns, I can show you how to do it. Just a moment. So here, so it's easy, you can do it. So you may be having x for 1, so for 5, and then you can have x and y. So you will be having some numbers for 5 years or 10 years. And then finally you calculate the total of it and calculate xy and x square also. And you will get sigma y, and this is your sigma x, and this is your sigma xy, and this is your sigma x square. So after calculating, after getting these numbers, you have to substitute these numbers in these two equations and simultaneously solve it. If you simultaneously solve it, then you get the value of alpha or beta. After getting the value of alpha or beta, again you have to substitute alpha or beta in any one of the equation and you get the other parameter. Okay, so that is how we have got alpha as 2725 and beta as 0.2407. Okay, so now these are the parameters. And now what we have to do is after calculating this alpha and beta, you have to calculate the y hat, which is the estimate. You have to estimate it again. So now after this, you need to calculate the y hat, which is none other than it is just an estimate. See, for the first year, say for example, suppose if this is this is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So maybe 2 crores, 4 crores, 6 crores, and 8 crores and 10 crores. In this case, again for the same year. So this is for 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, or 1920. 21. So the past 5 years you can have. So here again what I need to do is I have to, this is the actual figure, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 is the actual figure. I have using this alpha and beta, what I need to do is again I have to estimate. So how to estimate? I have the alpha value and I have the beta value, and actually you have to substitute the x value. Suppose if x is 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, in this particular case, instead of, suppose if alpha is, so in this particular equation, alpha is 725.4 plus beta is 0.2 into x. X is 1. So similarly, you have to apply this for almost all the years and you will be getting the estimates. So why I have to again calculate it? Already I have actual data of my y. Again, why I need to estimate? What is the necessity of estimating it again? Do we forecast for the past years? Generally, we don't forecast for the past years. We don't estimate it for the past years. Estimation is actually for future. But again, why are we estimating? For the years for which we have actual data. So it is to find out the difference between the actuals and the estimates. Okay, so why do we need to know the difference between the actuals and the estimates? See, I have the actual data for 2016 to 2020. And for same 2016 to 2020, again, I have to estimate it using this alpha and beta. I have to substitute the x. X is the determinant. Okay, so there may not be any change in the x. So in this particular case, again, I will estimate. Why I'm estimating is that to find out the difference between the actuals and the estimates. Suppose if the difference is very less, then what I have to do is I can say that my model is a perfect model. This is the estimate. After that, I have to calculate the error term. The error term is nothing but y minus, not the next slide. Y minus y hat is the error term. You just see the graph. In this particular graph, actually, the blue dotted lines, actually it is not a straight line. These are the actuals. These are the actual data. And the straight line is none other than it is the estimate. It is the estimated values. And you just see actually there is a difference between the actual data and the estimated data. So why is that? The blue dotted line, actually it's little curvier. Okay, curvy linear. It's not curvy linear. Actually, it's not a straight line. but your estimation is a straight line. So this is not actual fit. Suppose if both are exactly falling in the same line, you can consider that as a best fit. Okay, line of best fit. So here there is a slight difference. So this difference is none other than it is the error term. Okay, so this is the difference between your actuals and the estimate y minus y hat. And after that, using this, you will be calculating your coefficient of determination. You will be calculating your R square, and that will actually explain. Next slide, madam. Next slide. Next. Just move on to the next slide. Yes. So then you will be calculating the coefficient of. Actually, I don't have time, so that I'm just skipping few slides. Coefficient of determination. So in this particular case, your R square you will be calculating in order to know the extent of variation in your y variable, which is explained by the x variable. So suppose if R square is 95%, 0.95. So R square will be between 0 to 1. Okay, so in case if it is 0.95, which means that 95% of the change in my y variable has been explained by my x variable. So here, what is the x variable? Here I have used only the advertisement expenditure as the x variable. So this as advertisement expenditure alone has explained. It has explained how much percentage of variation in my sales. 95% of variation in my changes in sales has been explained only by my advertisement expenditure. So I can use only the advertisement, need not have any other variable. I can use only my advertisement expenditure in order to predict my future sales. Suppose if my advertisement expenditure increases by another 10%, if I increase my advertisement by another 10%, what would be my sales? So you can use the alpha which you have calculated plus beta into the future advertisement expenditure which you are going to spend. Say for example, extra 10, you just include what is, suppose if it is 50 crores, you just include another 10% to it, or you can include another 20%. If it increases by another 20%, then what would be my future sales? So that is how you can predict. Suppose if you want to increase your future sales, accordingly you have to change your advertisement expenditure and you can forecast the future demand. So this is how you can actually use this regression technique in order to find out the extent of influence of your x variable on y variable, and at the same time, suppose if your beta, see in this particular case, of course, you know the extent of variation, but you do not know whether your beta is significant or not. Okay, in most of the cases, it will be significant. In some cases, it may not be. Madam, please, next slide. Next. Yes, now we are going to test the hypothesis. So here, of course, how to test the hypothesis. So in this particular case, what we have to do is, next slide, madam, we have to test it. So here first, using the information which you have, the difference between your y and the y hat, you have to calculate the total standard error. So all this formula you would have been already working. And after that, using the total standard error, you have to calculate the standard error for that particular beta, and you have to calculate the p-value for your beta. And if the calculated value of your t statistics is greater than the critical value, then you can reject your null hypothesis. Otherwise, you cannot reject your null hypothesis. If you reject your null hypothesis, it means that you have actually estimated this future sales using advertisement expenditure, right? You can go ahead. You can very well use the advertisement expenditure for forecasting your future sales. Okay, so your beta must be significant. If your beta is significant, then you can go ahead with your estimation. Next slide, madam. Yes. So when you apply your SPSS, actually, so generally you can actually check this critical value in the table which has been given to you. Otherwise, what you can do is you can run the analysis in SPSS or in Excel also you can run the analysis, and you can see whether what is the probability value of actually committing your type 1. It will give you the probability value. Next slide, madam. Next slide. Yeah. So in the next slide, you can see, so the p-value. So in this particular case, the p-value has been mentioned. If the p-value is less than 0.05, then you can very well reject your null hypothesis. You can check with the critical value also. See, if the if the calculated value is greater than the critical value, then certainly your p-value will be less than 0.05. Okay, the probability of committing type 1 error is actually very less. It is less than 5%. In this particular case, I have given that the p-value is 5.40219 e to the power e minus 24. E minus 24 means before this number actually you will be having 24 zeros. Suppose if it is plus, after this number, after 9, you will be having 24 zeros. So it is minus 24, so it is 0.000. So the probability value is 0, which means that the chance of your type 1 error is very negligible. So you can very well confidently reject your null hypothesis, which means that here you can say that advertisement expenses has a significant impact on your company's sales. Suppose if you want to increase your company's sales, you can very well increase the advertisement expenditure. So that is the decision which you can actually take. Similarly, this the same kind of example can be applied for any number of variables. It can be with respect to any macroeconomic variable, GDP or exports, or it can be with investment and GDP. What is the extent of influence of your GDP on foreign investment, or whether foreign investment is having any influence on your GDP or not, whether the money which has been spent for controlling emissions, whether it has actually controlled emissions or not. Okay, so you can consider the level of emissions as your dependent variable, and the money which has been spent as the government expenditure on controlling emissions as a independent variable, and you can actually apply the simple regression. In any context, you can apply the simple regression technique. In case if you have more than one, so I just told you only. Madam, next, please, next. This is forecast. Okay, this is just forecast for 21 or 22. If you want to forecast, you can use the same alpha and beta. You can focus. Next one. Next. So this I have given. Suppose if advertisement expenditure is 36,000, 37,000, 38, 39, what would be the future sales? Okay, so how much ever you can, suppose if you can spend 39,000 and if your sales increases to this extent, certainly you can actually increase your advertisement expenditure. Otherwise, if there is no improvement in your sales, even though if you increase your advertisement expenditure, then it is not necessary to spend much. Next. Yes. So now, earlier we have discussed only one particular variable. Now, if you have multiple variables, earlier we had only advertisement expenses. Suppose if you want to include price of the product, if you want to include the price of substitutes, if you want to include the price of relative complementary products, and income of the consumer, the per capita income of the consumers, and then any other tax rate, and then interest rate. Interest rate also determine the sales of your particular product. Okay, and the availability of loan, consumer loan. So all those things you can include, whichever variable you want, you can include. Suppose if the R square is very less, if it is only 0.5, but still, if the beta is 6, sometimes R square may be very less, but beta may be significant. Okay, which means that you have to improve your model. How to improve this model? You add one more variable here. Okay, apart from advertisement, then the advertisement expenses plus the price, advertisement expenses plus the tax, or now you can include the GST tax rate as well, GST, and you can include the price of the complementary products, price of the substitute products, and the other aspects as well as anything you want to include, you can include in order to improve your R square. But there will be a problem when you start. So what would be the challenge when you start keep on increasing one by one? So you will face the problem of multicollinearity. So when you have more number of x variables, you will be having beta 1, beta 2, beta 3, beta 4, and same formula, similar kind of formula, the same, it's all the same. Okay, only equation differs. Instead of, suppose if you have 3 variables, instead of 2 simultaneous equations, you have to have 3 equations in order to solve it. You do get beta 1, 2, and 3, and you have to apply, and same, you have to again use all the parameters alpha, beta 1, beta 2, beta 3 to estimate your y value, and you have to find out the difference between the actuals and the estimates. And if almost all the but at least 2 or 3 beta values are significant and your R square is quite high, you can actually use this parameter for forecasting the Y value. Madam, please next. Go to the next one. So this is for 3 variables. If it is for 4 or 5 variables, you will be having n number of equations. So first, in case if you have 3 variables, you have to actually solve the first 2 and either the first one and third one or third one and second one, and you will be having extra 2 equations, and finally you have to solve the 4th equation, 5th equation. And first you will get one parameter, and using that you have to calculate the other parameters. And manually, if you do, it will take at least more than 1 hour to solve this. And of course, your SPSS and Excel will give you immediate results of your beta 1, beta 2, and alpha value. Next, madam, go on to the next slide. Just so here also you have to test the hypothesis, but here you have to check whether beta 1 is equal to 0 or not. Similarly, beta 2. Similarly, if you have beta 3, again you have to check all that. So it is not necessary that all betas must be significant. It is enough at least 2 or 3 betas are significant, not necessary all the betas are significant. And you can compare which variable is actually influencing the most. Is it advertisement expenditure, or price, or the consumer's income, or tax rate, or etc. So which one is the major influencing factor that you can actually check using standardized beta. Okay, you can compare, you can make comparison compared to price of the product. Actually, advertisement expenditure is influencing the most. So in that way, you can conclude. Next. Yeah, so these are all the formulas which I have given. If you want, you can go through. Next, man. Next. Okay, the previous one. See, in this case, I have asked you a question that is the regression as a whole significant? Is it enough if you check only the beta values are significant, B1, B2, B3, B4? Definitely not. So in this case, as a whole, if the regression is significant or not, you have to actually calculate the F statistics. In case of simple regression, it is enough if you actually check the T statistics, whether the beta is significant or not. But in case of multiple regression, you have to check the in order to know the effect of individual variables, in order to know the effect of advertisement expenditure, you have to check whether B1 is significant. In order to know the effect of price, you have to check whether B2 is significant or not. In order to know the effect of income of the consumers, you have to check whether B3 is significant or not. So, but as a whole, whether the model is significant or not, you have to calculate. Next one, you have to calculate the F statistics. Madam, next. Yes, you have to calculate the F statistics. So in this particular case, actually the alternate hypothesis, you can actually reject the null hypothesis if at least one beta is significant. Only then you can say that whether the model is significant or not. So otherwise, sometimes what happens is that you will be having very high R square. R square may be 0.98. But none of the betas will be significant. Your T statistics may not be significant. Similarly, your F value may not be significant. What is the problem? What is the problem? R square is very high, but F is also not significant, and sometimes T may not be significant. So it may be because of some other issue. So what are those issues? Madam, next. So these are some of the challenges which you are going to face. I'm not going to discuss everything here. Yeah, few things I'll just discuss. Multicollinearity alone I'll just discuss, and I'll mention what are the other things, because for each and everything you need at least an hour to discuss. So some of the assumptions. See, when you call this linear regression model as a classical linear regression model, if it satisfies almost all the assumptions, these are a few assumptions which I have given, many more assumptions also there. First one, there should not be a multicollinearity problem. In case if you use this multiple x's, more than one x variable, if you use, then there should not be a multicollinearity problem. And apart from that, there should be stationary, residuals, parameters must be linear, everything you have to, almost all the conditions must be satisfied. If any one of these conditions are not satisfied, then again you have some problem. So now what is this multicollinearity at the first place? I'll just explain what is multicollinearity and stationarity alone. Residuals, I told you, right? Residuals are none other than the error term, the difference between the y and the y hat, and actually when you plot, it must be normally distributed, otherwise it's a problem. Okay, and the parameters, your alpha and beta must be linear, and apart from that, the number of observations, which means, let's say for example, the number of data points you have, right? sometimes you will be having data for 10 years, which means that 10 data point will be there. One by one, you will be actually typing 10 data points in an Excel sheet. Similarly, you will be having 11 or 12 variables. Suppose if you want to know the determinants of foreign investments or portfolio investments. So whether GDP or your stock index or exports, suppose if it is foreign direct investments, it can be GDP, exports, imports, exchange rate, and then your country specific variables such as corruption index, and then what else? Human development index, and then average real wages, and then cost. Generally the inflation rate. So in order to, inflation can be considered as a proxy for your cost. So inflation, etc. So like that, if you have 13 variables and if you have only 10-year data, then it's a problem. So number of observations actually must be actually greater than the number of parameters or number of variables. Okay, number of parameters means for each variable you'll be having a parameter plus your alpha. Sometimes what happens is that you will be using the lag of your dependent variable also as your independent variable. You will have extra parameters. Okay, so whatever is the parameter b1, b2, b3, b4, etc., and your alpha, it should not be more than the number of observations you have. So either you have to eliminate few variables, or you have to increase your data point, which is the number of years, a number of quarters, a number of months, or if it is daily data, you have to increase the observations. Okay, and first we'll just check about this multicollinearity. Next, multicollinearity. See, multicollinearity is none other than, see, I just told you how to detect this kind of multicollinearity. I'll just tell you one thing. Sometimes the correlation between the independent variables will be very high. Okay, which means that the same example we can take: exports, exchange rate, import, and trade volume or trade openness, and many other variables. Your average real wages, interest rate, etc. Okay. So here, what happens is that there will be a very high correlation between your independent variables, which means that between your X variables. So in that case, what happens is that those relationship between your independent variables will actually inflate the R-square value. And so the R-square value will be very high. I told you, right, sometimes T value, the betas may not be significant. The beta values may not be significant, and the overall model may not be significant. The F statistics may not be significant, but your R-square may be very high. It can be 9.98 or 0.99 sometimes. Why? What is the problem? It is because of the problem of multicollinearity. So in case of multiple regression, first you have to check whether the independent variables are independent of each other or not. So it must be independent of each other. They should not be related to each other. If it is related to each other, then it will inflate your R-square value. The variables may not be, maybe collectively significant, but they may not be individually significant. Actually, for forecasting, it's not an issue, but anyway, if you want to know to what extent each and every variable is actually influencing the other variable, so you cannot exactly find out. So what is the extent of influence of each variable? And sometimes it will possess very high standard errors, and the coefficient which you're getting may not be accurate. So these are some of the problems when you encounter when you apply the, especially the secondary data, and apply your multiple regression model. Sometimes even in primary data also you may face this kind of problem in case the variables are related, but the chances are little less when compared to secondary data, because see, GDP, of course, it do if you use GDP, index of industrial production, exports, etc. Exports in this index of industrial production, everything is highly related. Almost all the many components are included in GDP, included in exports, included in index of industrial production, etc. Okay, so which means that when you run a correlation analysis, almost everything will be highly related. If you use all these variables as your independent variables, then all this club together and it will try to inflate the R-square. So how to overcome this particular problem? Next slide, please. How to detect this multicollinearity problem? First one is you have to check how much is your R-square value. Okay, that is the coefficient of determination. So if the R-square value is very, very high, but only one or two T, suppose if we have 10 variables, only one variable is significant, which means that only beta 1 is significant. The T statistics of beta 1 is alone significant. but your R square value is very high. You have to run a partial correlation and you have to examine whether the independent variables are related or not. Otherwise, what you can do is you can run a auxiliary regression. Auxiliary regression means the main regression equation is equal to your Y. Your sales is equal to advertisement plus advertisement alpha plus beta 1 advertisement expenditure plus other price of the product, price of the substitute, price of the complementary products, etc. Now, what you have to do is you have to take this sales Y variable. You should not consider in the auxiliary regression. In this auxiliary regression, what is the first X variable? My first X variable here is advertisement expenditure. So first, let me consider advertisement expenditure as my Y variable and all the other variables as my X variable. Similarly, next variable will be the Y variable and other X's will be my. You have to actually run and suppose if you have 4 X variables, then first you have to consider X1 as Y and X2, X3, X4 as independent variables. And next X2 will be your Y variable and X1, X3, X4. So similarly, you have to run for all the variables and run the auxiliary regression. If the R square value is very high, which means that those variables are highly related. Otherwise, if you use, you can use this variance inflation factor and tolerance level in order to find out whether there is a presence of multicollinearity in your model or not. Okay, so next slide, please. So this is the formula to calculate your variance inflation factor and tolerance level. See, actually in Excel, if you run this multiple regression, you will not get this. There is no option for getting this WIF and tolerance, the variance inflation factor and your tolerance level. But in SPSS, you do have the options. Actually, in statistics, you have to click this collinearity diagnosis. Okay, so if you click, then automatically in your output, you will get WIF and tolerance value. See, if WIF is 1, if both WIF and tolerance is close to 1, then you can conclude that there is no collinearity. There is no problem of multicollinearity. But if WIF is towards infinity and if its tolerance is towards 0, because tolerance is nothing but the inverse of WIF. Actually, you can see in this particular formula. Okay, so in this particular case, if tolerance is close to 0 and if WIF is near to infinity, then there is a presence of multicollinearity. Then how to overcome this problem of multicollinearity? Madam, next. One is you can drop some of the variables. I just told you few variables. If you almost all your X's are independent, X's are highly dependent, then you can drop few variables. If you use GDP, index of industrial production, exports, imports, and then your average real wages, per capita income, etc., all are very well related. Instead of having 5 or 6 variables, you can have the major variable. I can take only GDP. I will not take IIP or exports or whatever it is. I need not take. Suppose if I want to capture that, I can use it in another model. Leave dropping this, and I can actually use it as a second model, a different model. Okay, so you have to drop few variables. Otherwise, what you need to do is you have to actually pull the data. That is possible. You need to transform the variables. You can take first difference, or you can go for ratio. The entire set of variables have to be first difference, or the entire set of variable has to be transformed into its ratio form, or some of the new data. If you add some new data or additional data, sometimes you can avoid this problem of micronumericity, and that is another remedial measure. And you can go for a polynomial regression. Otherwise, factor analysis is another option. See, what you can do is, we have tried that in one research paper also. See, we don't want to leave any macroeconomic variables, because we felt that almost all the variables are actually useful. We want to retain that. So for that, what we have done is we just run a factor analysis. Actually, this is just a data reduction technique basically, and all the X variables we have used in that factor analysis for running the factor analysis, and all this entire 7 to 8 variables have been clubbed. And finally, we got 2 factors. So after that, after getting the 2 factors, that factor scores can be saved in your Excel sheet. And those factor scores, what you can do is you can use it as Independent variables. See, this 8 variables, I'll tell you the exact variables. See, we have used FDI as a dependent variable, and the independent variable is GDP, index of industrial production, and then real effective exchange rate, and then trade openness, which is the combination of our imports and exports, and then interest rate, average real wages, and then tax rate, corporate tax rate, and then infrastructure. Okay, so 8 to 9 variables we have just used. So after running factor analysis, this 8 to 9 variables has been reduced to 2 factors. And after that, if you see the factor scores, you can actually name these variables. All the variables, especially GDP, index of industrial production, and infrastructure, etc., have been clubbed in factor 1, and the remaining variables, average real wages, interest, and tax rate, etc., have been actually captured in factor 2, which means that the first set of variables we just named it as growth factor, and the second one is cost factor, especially GDP, index of industrial production, your trade openness, all are representing the growth of the economy, and the other set of factors, average real wages, interest rate, tax rate, etc., are all cost related factors. So the foreign investors, they do either see the growth factor or the cost factor, and after that what we have done is we just saved this in the Excel sheet. The factor scores have been saved, and we use this growth factor and the cost factor as an independent variable in order to know which one is influencing the foreign investment. So in that way, that is another solution, especially for solving this kind of multicollinearity problem. Okay, and this is one particular assumption which I have discussed. It's almost time. I'll just stop here, and similarly, you have only stationarity I'll just discuss. See, whenever if you use continuous time series data, you have to check, or even in case of panel data also, you have to check whether the individual variables are stationary or not. Stationarity means that actually the mean and variance, especially of the particular variable, should not vary over time. How to say? See, you are drawing data from a particular sample, so you will be having data for 100 years, say for example, and you are just taking the sample of 20 years. Okay, after that, even if you take the subsamples, then actually the mean and the variance should not vary over time. Okay, it must be constant. It must be time invariant. If it is vary over time, then what you cannot generalize it. You can say that, say for example, GDP is influencing FDI during this particular period of research. You cannot generalize that generally GDP will be influencing FDI. So generalization cannot be possible. So you have to check whether the variable is stationary or not. You have many other tests, especially to check whether the variables are stationary. Suppose if the variables are not stationary, sometimes you may end up in a spurious regression. It is called as some variables may not be related, but still when you run a regression analysis, when you run a linear regression analysis, it will show that there is a relationship, but actually it is meaningless. Say for example, your time of going to bed and my time of switching off the lights. Okay, so somebody is collecting data about daily what time I'm switching off my lights. Okay, and maybe Kamakshi madam or someone else, and what time she is going to bed. So they are just collecting these two variables and to find out whether there is any influence of the time I am switching off my light and the time Kamakshi madam is going to her bed. Okay, so every day the time they calculate and find, and you can apply a regression technique. So you can consider the time which Kamakshi madam is going to bed as Y variable and the time I am switching off my light as X variable. Whether is there any influence of the time I am switching over light and she is going to bed? Is there any relationship? Definitely, there's no relationship at all. Okay, but if I run a regression analysis, sometimes you get very high R square and it may be significant as well. How? It's called as a spurious regression. So in this particular case, what you have to do is, in order to avoid it, you have to check whether the data is stationary or not. Of course, there is a chance. Suppose if every day, if both of us are talking over phone, and after that, I'm switching off my light and she's going to bed. So if that is the case, then there may be some kind of relationship. So first what you need to do is we have to check whether both the variables, x variable and all the y variables are stationary or not. If it is stationary only, then you will get meaningful results. Sometimes if both are non-stationary, even though sometimes there will be a relationship, but it may not be meaningful. It may be a spurious regression. So these are all just two assumptions which I have just discussed, and how to overcome this kind of stationarity, non-stationary issues. What you can do is you can actually take the first difference of your variable. First difference means, see, most of the cases, in case of stock prices, we do consider returns. How do you calculate the returns? The current price minus the previous price, or you can go for this log returns as well. Okay, which the first difference is nothing but 2020 GDP minus 2019 GDP, and 21 GDP minus 20 GDP. So like that, you have to take the first difference. You will be having a column, and and you will be taking the first difference, and you do consider the first difference of the actual variable. You have to take the first difference of your GDP, current GDP minus previous GDP. First year you will not get actually. So this is how you have to calculate the first difference. So suppose if it is 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, and 2020. So this is my GDP. I'm just giving some rough numbers. Okay, $20 billion. You can consider $1 million, 50, or it is not GDP. Maybe I can consider this as my Y and my X and 60. So here, what I do is, suppose if I find this is maybe 15, 25. 35, 45, 55. Okay. So in this particular case, what I have to do is I have to consider the first difference of this variable. Okay. The first difference of this variable, how do I take? First year I will not get. The second is 30 minus 20, which is 10. So in this case, I have given 10 as the difference. Suppose if it is 42, then this will be 12. Okay, 8 and 10. So this is the first difference. Similarly, for X also, you have to take the first difference. So the difference between the current year and the previous year. First year you will not get any value because you do not know the information about the previous year. Then you have to calculate the first difference. Now instead of this actual X and actual Y, I am just going to use the first difference of my Y and the first difference of my X in my model in case the actual data is non-stationary. Okay, or you can do any kind of transformation. Sometimes first difference also may not be stationary, so you have to go for second difference. Otherwise, you have to go for this log returns also. Sometimes you can consider many forms of transformation is there. And similarly, autocorrelation is another important problem when you deal with this time series models, which means that the error term, the current error term will actually influence the previous error term. So for that, what you have to do is you have to consider the lag of your y variable as the dependent variable in your model. See, in my model, I just showed you. See, my model is, say for example, foreign investment is equal to alpha plus GDP, beta 1, GDP plus beta 2, IIP, index of industrial production. Okay. So plus error term. So now I have two variables. Now I face the problem of autocorrelation, which means that this y minus y hat is there, right? This y minus y hat. So this is my E actually. So for every year I'll be having E1, E2, E3, E4. If I calculate, I have to calculate for all the years. Now, suppose if this value, E2 value is influencing E1, or E3 is influencing E2, or E4 may be influencing E1 and E2. So this is called as autocorrelation. If E2, if exactly the error term is influencing the previous one, it is first order autocorrelation. Sometimes E4 may also influence E1 or E2. Okay, so there can be second order or third order autocorrelation also. So if that is the case, then what I have to do is in my model, I have to actually include the y variable, okay, plus beta 3 yt minus 1 or yt minus 2 also. It depends. The lag, actually you have to test which one is the appropriate lag. Yt1 as my variable, which means that I have to take the previous year's FDI value. For an investment, T minus 1 I need to consider. So my y is equal to again. So there are certain models which is called as an auto-regression model, which is nothing but alpha plus this y, this is yt, this is yt minus 1. So the same dependent variable will become my independent variable, which means that the lag of the dependent variable will become my independent variable. So how to actually take that variable? So how do you take this variable as, say for example, if this is y, the dependent variable, it can be sales or it can be GDP. So this is year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So now if this value is 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, then I cannot consider the first year. Okay. So my yt minus 1 would be, so what is this value? Actually, this is 20y, right? So this is my y value, appropriate yt minus 1. And the previous year value will be the yt minus 1 for the third year. And the third year value will be the yt minus 1 value for the fourth year. And this is how I have to calculate. Now this yt minus 1 is, again, I'm just going to consider this as my another x variable in the model. Now you just calculate, you can do the actual calculations and you can proceed. So in this case, I can actually solve the problem of autocorrelation. Autocorrelation is none other than the error term. If the current error term has an influence on the previous error term, then I do face a problem of autocorrelation that can be considered. So the next one is causal relationship. Causality we will discuss later. I think it's almost time. I'll just stop here. Madam, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. If you have any queries, you can talk. Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for the deeper, knowledgeable and informative session, ma'am. Like what you said about how to find the independent variable, dependent variable, about multicollinearity and linear regression model. Everything was so useful. And thank you for sharing your knowledge, ma'am.
Okay. Any questions? If you have, you can raise your questions.
Yes,
Teachers
ma'am.
or students, research scholars.
I request participants to post your queries in the chat box. I call upon Surya P and Dhanlakshmi C to handle the question and answer session.
Oh, sorry, please unmute your.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am, for sharing and enlightening us with a new insight for our research. Here I'm glad to post some of the queries raised by me. Ma'am, will you please tell what are the ethical approval for secondary data?
See, ethical approval is that, see, first thing, while collecting the data itself, you have to see whether the particular source is an authenticated source or not. And sometimes what we do is we do consider certain variables as proxy variables in order to have a variable. Say, for example, I'll just tell you, trade openness is one variable. So how do you measure this kind of trade openness? You can have the combination of exports and imports, and you can consider that as a proxy for trade openness. But for that, you have to give a proper justification. And in case of secondary data, there is a chance of manipulating the variables. Say, for example, what happens sometimes, even if it is not stationary, some researchers, they do, of course, if the transformation is a proper transformation, it's perfect, it's not an issue. But sometimes they do give some falsified number in order to make that as a stationary variable. So those kind of manipulation is possible in case of secondary data. You have to actually avoid all those issues. And not only that, Sometimes what happens, students, they do get information for few years and they do extrapolate. Extrapolation is possible, but you have to actually mention it in your methodology. But maybe in between, if you didn't get data for few years, it is possible. But throughout, you should not extrapolate and you should not claim that it's an actual data. So those are some of the unethical practices which you have to actually avoid. And ethical practices is that whatever data you have to mention the source. You have to mention what is the transformation which you have done, and what is the limitations with respect to that particular data, and especially with respect to definition. See, FDI, I just told you, right? The definition has changed, but without mentioning the change in the definition, without mentioning that as the limitation in my study, if I say that I have used FDI data, then which means that I am just underestimated, basically. Okay, so such kind of underestimation or overestimation is possible, but sometimes you cannot avoid it, but still you have to actually record it when you publish or when you write it in your thesis. If possible, you have to avoid, but sometimes it may not be avoidable. But willful manipulation should not be done with respect to secondary data. Yes, I think somebody has asked a question on secondary qualitative data. Of course, you can use certain qualitative data in secondary data research as well. It is it can be a mixed method. Say for example, suppose if somebody would have observed about a particular, in case of science or in case of even consumer attitude or behavior also, see, you can actually video record or you can observe the attitude of the customers who are involved in this window shopping, basically. Okay, so in that case, you can actually capture those information, you can code it, and you can narrate it. You can use the data and you can do a qualitative analysis. Similarly, you can there is the review which you're doing, right? The systematic review of literature which you're doing, and then the meta-analysis which you're doing. You can use the qualitative data and you can use content analysis from the previous studies. Whatever information you gather, you can actually do it, and you can do some kind of qualitative information also. Maybe some videos or some observations you can actually consider, and you can use some of the qualitative approaches, especially for doing those kind of analysis. Yes. Data requirement, actually, minimum 30 plus we need. See, in some cases it is not possible, especially when you deal with yearly data. Sometimes data may not be possible. Okay, so at that situation, at least if you have 30 data points, then it is well and good. Sometimes if it is not available, you have to go for what to say, quarterly data or daily data. Only then, otherwise also you can predict, but still the prediction may not be perfect. Yes, anything else?
And the question is from Payal. Any good software to analyze secondary data, qualitative data?
Sorry, I couldn't hear. Hello.
Ma'am, the question is from Payal. Any good software to analyze secondary qualitative data?
Then there is something called Provalis Research Text Analysis, which you can do. Many other softwares, annotations you can do. This Web QDA also is there. So you can do a lot of qualitative analysis using these kind of softwares. Yes, so you can apply this mixed methods research also for doing this. NVivo is there. This particular software you can use, especially when you use qualitative data and applying this mixed method research. It's one of the most popular software. NVivo. Yes, and yes.
Thank you, ma'am. The another question is, what are the potential errors which can be hidden within secondary data?
Sorry?
What are the potential errors which can be hidden within secondary data?
Potential risk you are talking about?
Yes, ma'am, potential errors.
Okay, potential risk. I'm sorry.
Errors, ma'am. Errors.
Sorry?
Potential errors.
Potential errors. I just told you, right? These are some of the biases. Actually, sometimes you do go commit specification bias. Sometimes what happens is that while estimating the model, you may not actually include the exact variables. Sometimes there may be overestimation, sometimes there may be underestimation. All those things are possible. Specification bias is a major problem which generally the researchers they do face, and for that you have a lot of other tests to check whether you're committing specification bias or not. Because overestimation and underestimation is another problem, and then misinterpretation of data, and then sometimes what is the definition that you are just using, especially while considering a particular variable. All those things are the mistakes generally which we commit when we deal with the secondary data. Yes.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, another question, ma'am. How do we test the validity and reliability of secondary source, ma'am?
Validity, same. You can whatever analysis you just apply for primary data, you can apply all that in case of secondary database. Basically, of course, generally the secondary source of information, reliability and validity cannot be a problem. Why? Because is that most of the sources are actually published sources. Suppose if you use the primary data which has been collected by the other researchers, in that case you can actually go for the other reliability and validity tests like your Cronbach alpha, and then you can go for a confirmatory factor analysis in order to check your reliability and validity of your information. So similar, whatever test you do apply, especially for primary data, the same test can be applied for secondary data also. All the tests can be applied for secondary data, so it's not a problem. But the main issue is that once if your data is stationary, and you can go ahead with any kind of models, basically any kind of linear models. Yes. Anything?
Regression is only possible way to find determinants, or can we use any other tools, ma'am?
Determinants. Not necessarily. No, of course, regression is the best method. Apart from that, what you can do is you can find out individually. You can use all the chi-square, and then whether you can find out the association based on the association between the variables. You can actually find out whether a particular variable is having association or not. But regression is the best method. What I do, I do generally apply. That's the best method. When you have a best method, you know, even say for example, analysis of variance also can be used, but directly you cannot. The hypothesis which you state may not be the direct hypothesis. You do find out whether there is, suppose if you classify group of companies, the sales of company into different groups. If there are more than 3 groups are there, more than 3 companies, sales data is there for over a period of time. In that case, if you want to find out whether the nature of the company, based on the nature of the company, or based on the nature of the industry, or based on its volume, if you divide the entire set of companies, if you have 100 companies, and based on the nature of the company, or based on the volume of the company, or based on the performance of the company, if you classify them into 4 groups. In that case, if you want to know whether the nature of the company influences the performance, or whether the nature of the company influences sales, then you can apply analysis of variance, and indirectly, if it is significant, if the sales of all the 3 groups or 4 groups are significantly different, then you can conclude that the nature of that particular company is influencing the performance or sales of that particular company. So indirectly, you can use this analysis of one-way or two-way analysis of variance, or MANOVA also you can use in order to find out the determinants. But it is actually the indirect way of doing, by finding out whether there is any difference in the characteristics of that particular variable with respect to different samples. Okay, the direct method is actually regression. Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, another question, ma'am. In primary data and secondary data, in which researchers need to put more effort to collect data and analyze?
In both the cases, it depends upon the variables which you are choosing actually. Sometimes if you choose variables which are available in the RBI website or in TAG, it's easy job. That's it. But still, your data must be stationary, and when you apply the model, you have to check all the conditions. So equally, both are difficult. So I don't say that this is easy and that is difficult. Sometimes in case of primary data, see, you have the control over, in case of primary data collection, the researcher has the control over the entire data set. So whichever data you wish, you want, in that fashion you can collect. But in case of secondary data, you have the restriction. You are just using someone else's data. Somebody else would have collected that particular data. So you don't have the control over the particular data. So in both the case, I don't say which is easy and difficult. Both are difficult. Yes.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. The another question from Payal. What are the few ethical factors that scholars should keep in mind while conducting a research using secondary data?
One thing is no data manipulation. I think I already mentioned, you should not manipulate the data, and you have to mention the source perfectly. And you have to, suppose if you could get the same data from multiple sources, you have to actually ensure that which is the authenticated source. And you should not do any kind of manipulation with respect to secondary data. First thing is that the researcher should be very objective. And you may expect some results. Sometimes you will not get the expected result. You may expect that if you receive foreign investment, or if you actually introduce a particular policy or a particular measure, there will be a positive result. Sometimes the result may be negative as well. Okay, so this is where most of the researchers they do behave little unethically. So they just wanted the results which they expect in general, but accordingly they will try to manipulate the entire results. So that is very, very unethical. So you have to be very objective. As a researcher, you are just making an inquiry, and you are trying to collect the information as accurate as possible, and you have to apply the appropriate tools and techniques in order to analyze that particular data. And whatever results you are just getting, you have to be objective. You need to be open to actually convey that particular results, and you can argue why it has happened and how it has happened. All those things you can write it in your discussion point, but you should not try to manipulate the results. Even though if you do not like or like the results, you should not manipulate the results. So sometimes what happens is that, in case of my research, generally it's a general assumption that when you receive foreign investment, of course it will have a positive impact, but actually it is not so. Actually, it is not so. It has no influence on most of the macroeconomic variables, because whatever we have received is very, very meager amount when compared to our GDP or any of the macros. And not only that, very few industries have been benefited. Very few, very handful, 1 or 2 industries. That's it. Except many industries, they have not benefited. But still, suppose if I wish that it should have a positive impact, that is the researcher's bias basically. And if I try to manipulate something which is not the actual result, then it is unethical. So whatever results which you have to take utmost care in determining the objectives and variables, and determining the source from where you're going to collect data, and you have to use appropriate tool. But in spite of that, if you get the result which is opposite to your expectation, then you should be open to actually inform the actual results, not the manipulated ones. Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for patiently answering all our queries. Thank you, Surya, and thank you, Dhanalakshmi, for bringing out all the queries to the stage. Now, any day or any occasion has to come to an end. In that way, we'll end the session with the vote of thanks. Now, I call upon Geeta Lakshmi D to propose the vote of thanks.
Gratitude is the memory of art. I would like to thank our beloved chief guest, Dr. S. Mahalakshmi Madam, for joining and enlightening us with her knowledge. Today's webinar was highly informative, and the practical examples gave deep insights into the topic. I'm pretty sure the precious knowledge shared will definitely help to enhance our research insight. Once again, I would like to thank Dr. S. Mahalakshmi Madam for sparing her valuable time besides our busy schedule. I would also like to thank our college management, Principal Madam Dr. R. Geeta, Vice Principals Dr. M.S. Lekha Madam, Aided Stream, Dr. S. Sita Lakshmi Madam, Self-Finance Stream, Head of Research Department Dr. R. Savitri Madam, our Head in Charge Madam Dr. S. Kamakshi, and other faculty members and the technical support staff for their helping in organizing this webinar. I would also like to thank all the participants and the fellow students who joined this session and made this webinar a resounding one. Last but not least, I thank the Lord Almighty for everything that's happening right now. Thank you.
Thank you for giving me this wonderful opportunity. I thank the management, principal, vice principal, and Savitri madam, Kamakshi madam, and all the students, especially for the patient listening. And thank you all.
Ma'am, excuse me, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
I request all the panelists to switch on their video so that we can take a snap.
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, all panelists.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, madam.
Thank you very much, ma'am. It was a wonderful session, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you.